SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Dear learners, I welcome you in this course Research and Publication Ethics. Today in this lecture we will be discussing about philosophy, logic and scientific research, the way they shape research and development, and they help researchers in order to write the thesis, understand the theories, and they can test and build the theories for the development of knowledge. My name is Dr. Nirbhay Kumar Mishra. I work as Associate Professor at Institute of Business and Management at JLA University, Mathura. Before we move ahead in this lecture to understand about philosophy, logic and scientific research, let's try to understand what we understood so far in the last second lecture. In the last lecture, we tried to discuss about philosophy and the way it works on the underlying principle of knowledge and reality, and how it analyzes the principle of reality to understand anything's existence, to understand the theory of knowledge, to understand the valid way of reasoning, and also to understand the value of research. So in that direction we discussed about philosophy. Then we tried to discuss about branches of philosophy in terms of metaphysics, epistemology, logic and axiology. We also comprehended its critical reason, the way it critically analyzes the reasons of any theory, any argument, and how it clinically tests anything in the research. Then we try to understand about the questions of reality, knowledge and values. In the last, we discussed how philosophy has evolved from ancient to modern times and how it has given direction to the science and research. Today in this lecture of the session, you all will understand about the role of philosophy in shaping the research and how philosophy has changed and developed research understanding. We will be discussing about the 4 prominent types of philosophies in respect to research development. Then we will try to understand the role of logic, which is very important in order to understand the argumentation and valid argument and valid way of reasoning. And then we will try to understand about the propositions, arguments, validity, invalidity, and we will be discussing about the square of position also. And in the end, we will try to understand the role of science in research, what we call the scientific research. So let's try to understand the role of philosophy in research first of all. As we know, philosophy is the love of knowledge. So what we do, what a researcher can do, how researcher can use the philosophy in order to develop his point of view, critical point of view, in order to develop his world view. So let's try to understand. As we know, philosophy analyzes the underlying principle of reality. It critically analyzes layer by layer of any theory, of any idea. So when a researcher studies, for example, any research paper, or he goes through any theory, then researcher must develop this kind of critical philosophical attitude in order to first doubt and question before he or she goes to establish any thesis or any point or any argument. He or she must critically question the topic, the idea, the thesis. So let's try to understand how philosophy has shaped the research. So let's take the development of philosophy from ancient to the modern time. So as we know, the philosophy in the ancient time it begins in wonder. Why? Because if we see the researchers of the ancient time, they were simply surprised by the natural powers, the way storms were coming, okay, the way they were not knowing about the causes of anything, whatever it was occurring. So, they tried to understand the nature first of all, and in that research we will try to understand the philosophers and theorists were concerned about what is the fundamental substance out of which this whole nature has been created. So, this was the first research question for the researchers of ancient time, ancient philosopher, that where from this nature has come and what is the substantial reality. Is that substantial reality is permanent, or that reality is changing, it is in change. So, it is permanent or it changes through the time. So, these were some questions. See, try to understand, they were analyzing these questions, that is it in the capacity of human mind actually to understand the nature first of all, understand the nature of reality, or it is in the capacity of human mind to explain the nature. So, these all were the research questions you see in the ancient time for the researchers. So, what they tried to do, they tried to first analyze the fundamental principles of reality. So, they analyzed fundamental principles of reality, FPR. So, try to understand, in that way researcher has to understand this kind of attitude they have to adapt when they go to do research. They have to first analyze the fundamental principles of reality. They have to understand the sources of substance, how any occurrence happen, what are the causes and effect, and then they have to understand the general principles behind it. So, we see in the ancient time philosophy begins in wonder, where the philosophers and researchers have prime question to understand the nature and how it has been constituted. Is there any permanent substance, or there is no permanent substance, is there only change? So, these were research questions before the philosophers in ancient time. When we go ahead to understand the nature of philosophy in the middle time, when we see that philosophy begins in faith. So, we see there is a kind of critical rationality which was prevailing in ancient time. We see this absence in the medieval time, and we see the impact of the popes and churches, impact of religion also on knowledge, on rationality. So, we see the critical rationality that prevailed in ancient time, that somehow diminishes time by time, and the middle time, you see in the Middle Ages, most of the researchers, philosophers, theorists, they were concerned about the religious interpretations of the reality, and more researchers were about the God. They were explaining everything in terms of the God's perspective, church perspectives, and that was the idea. So, when again we see the rise of reason, again we see in the modern philosophy, and we take the name the René Descartes, right. So, René Descartes was the philosopher who is also known as the father of modern philosophy, who gave this method of doubt also. And this modern trend in philosophy is precisely known as philosophy begins in doubt in the modern time, as René Descartes, he maintains this tradition, this method of doubt, that we should not accept anything unless it clearly and distinctly establishes itself. So, in that sense he establishes, first research question was that which is incorrigibly true, what is the idea which cannot be refuted, or which we can say is certainly true. So, he think that I think therefore I am. He gives this premise, I think therefore I am, and through which this he establishes the idea of self. And this was a research question before the René Descartes in modern time, that what is that actually exists, which is irrefutable, which is incorrigibly exist, even if we deny that existence, the existence proves itself. So according to him, we should try to develop this kind of philosophical critical attitude, that which is called a skepticism, and which is particular skepticism in the philosophy of Descartes, because he believes that the skepticism, the method of doubt, is only means to achieve the certain knowledge, and we can achieve certain knowledge by the capacity of human mind, by the capacity of reasons. So René Descartes, by establishing this self, he says that self is the substance which is incorrigibly and irrefutably true. So we have to understand how philosophy shapes the method of doubt, and how philosophy critically shapes the way a researcher can understand how we should accept and how we should critically analyze the things. In later times, we should discuss about the Wittgenstein's philosophy also, because his role is very prominent in the criticism of the metaphysics. The way Wittgenstein says that the role of philosophy is not in saying, because he believes that the facts and the statements can only be created by science. The role of science is to create the facts, but the role of philosophy is not to create the facts. The role of philosophy is not saying, the role of philosophy is sowing. So in sowing, what philosophy can do, philosophy can logically and critically analyze the facts that science offers. So we have to understand that in the Wittgensteinian philosophy, the philosophy gets its therapeutic or clinical shape, clinical role in research. So you see in the rise of Vienna Circle also in 1924, we see there is a critical movement against the metaphysics and other things, where they are more shaping towards the philosophy of science, and philosophy gets its shape in more scientific ways, and the role of philosophy was very limited that time to the only testing and the logical validity of the facts which science produces or offers. Now we will see the role of philosophy in scientific research. So when we philosophically conduct a scientific research, so first of all, it gives a researcher systematic ways of formulating a research problem, okay, and then it also helps the researchers in terms of formulating strategies in data collection, in quantitative and qualitative methods, processing and data analysis. So you see, the role of philosophy is at every step, because a researcher has to adapt this critical philosophical attitude in order to systematize his research, in order to critically test his research in terms of making research problem, making research strategies for the data collection, quantitative and qualitative methods. We also apply some kind of research philosophies that we will discuss further in this lecture. So there are three components of scientific research, right? First is ontology. In ontology, we study the theory of existence, how things actually exist. They exist as a whole, or they exist in parts, and what is the nature of reality? Is reality permanent? Is reality changing? So ontology, we can create ontologies of research, right? We can instigate ontologies of research. For example, if we take the example of COVID, how we can understand the COVID exists, right? In what ways COVID exists? So COVID exists as a disease, right? In what kind of disease it exists in the humans? So this way we have to create the ontologies. We have to understand about the reality of any disease, reality of any scientific principle or reality of any occurrences in the nature, but we have to fix the existence and the reality, and we have to investigate into its nature of existence and reality, and that is to the understanding of the ontology. And then we talk about the epistemology, right. This is ontology, we can say it is called theory of existence, TOE, theory of existence, right. And epistemology, we can say the theory of knowledge, that is TOK. So, in the theory of knowledge, we try to understand how we can know certain thing which exists, and what are the sources of knowledge, what are the methods of knowledge, and do we have the certain knowledge. So, we can say that in the research also, in the deductive research, we can have the certain knowledge, we can establish the conclusion with certainty, and we can have an argument which is valid and certain arguments, sound argument. But in case of inductive researches, we see where certainty is not possible because the data is very limited. We will be discussing about inductive and deductive research also in this lecture. So, see, the epistemology depends on the way we conduct the research, the area, the subject of research. So, epistemology is basically theory of knowledge, in which we question how knowledge is possible, and is knowledge possible. The first question, in what ways it is possible, what are the sources of knowledge, what are the methods of knowledge through which we establish the epistemology in the research, right. Like when we have to have a particular methodology to conduct a research, right. So, in the methodology, we can have a quantitative methodology or qualitative methodology, right. See, we see the use of qualitative methods in social science research, and we see the quantitative use of quantitative methods in the scientific researches also. Now, we have to understand the scientific way of conducting research and using the philosophical approach also. In that, a researcher must develop understanding of the world view to comprehend philosophical, theoretical, instrumental and methodological foundations of any research. So, here we have to understand philosophy and the scientific attitude. See, both kind of attitude, philosophical and scientific attitude, a researcher has to develop a comprehensive understanding of worldview, right. It is not that we have to conduct research in a particular instance, we have to test a theory in different instances, right. So, we have to extend our our perspective of research also, and then we have to understand that how that philosophical, theoretical, instrumental and methodological foundations they fit in that world view. So, you see, when you work on any topic, you see the development of research, there are number of theories which work, and a researcher goes and study all the theories, researcher understand different perspectives, and then researcher is able to critically analyze those perspectives, those ideas, those theories, those tradition which which evolve across the time. So, that is the way a researcher has to go through a literature review of any particular scientific research, right. You have to have a good particular review to understand the this kind of expansion, this kind of world view also. So, it is development of basic research assumptions, its understanding and nature. It is a method by which scientists develop ideas into knowledge in research development. There are 4 types of prominent research philosophy that we will discuss further in this lecture. Now, the 4 types of different research philosophies, which are known as positivist research philosophy, interpretivist research philosophy, pragmatist research philosophy and realist research philosophy. We will try to understand each philosophy by the example, right. So, let us say there is one researcher R, and now a researcher works on a topic, let us say X, okay, and how we establish he is applying the positivistic research philosophy, that is PRP, okay. So, in that positivist research philosophy, researcher has to have the scientific attitude. Now, he just tries to investigate into X the way it objectively exists in the nature. It objectively exists, how X objectively exists in nature, right. How objectively exists in nature means that researcher has the objective reasons to understand the reality, right. So, in positivist reality, it is based on the objective reasons, right. So, researchers point of view is not important here. Here researcher has to be unbiased in conducting this kind of applying this positive research philosophy. So, in positive research philosophy, we see the research is based on objective methods, precisely this is based on the quantitative methods, where researcher is unbiased, okay, and this positivistic research philosophy is commonly used in the scientific research, right. Now, we come to the interpretivistic, right, interpretivistic research philosophy. Okay. So, it is based on the interpretivist research philosophy is based on the interpretivism, right. So, here you see there is a researcher, okay, R, and there is a reality, let us say R1, okay, and now researcher has to investigate into this reality. So, here interpretivist research philosophy believes that the reality is not objective, but it is somehow depend on the way it is interpreted by a researcher. So, there is a possibility of various interpretations, right, and a researcher can have a particular interpretation about the reality. So, in the interpretivist research philosophy, what matters is not the objective reality, the matters more is the researcher's point of view. Here researcher point of view is more important than what is the reality, what is the case. So, in the interpretivist research philosophy, we see there is a biasness, because it solely depends on the way it is interpreted. So, in the social sciences research, we see there are many research studies in the sociology, in the culture, right, in the social sciences, in the psychology, where you see the interpretation, how it is interpreted. Okay, interpretation is more important than what is case in the reality. Now, let us talk about the pragmatic research philosophy, right. So, in the pragmatic research philosophy, PRP, okay, see, first of all, pragmatic research philosophy do not have any its own systematic structure. Okay. It is using both method, let us say positivistic philosophy methods and interpretivist philosophy method. What suits to the research problem, what suits to research problem, okay, that matters most. So, in the PRP, right, in the pragmatic research philosophy, the importance is not to the particular research method. It can be any of from positive research philosophy or pragmatic or interpretive research philosophy, but here researcher is more concerned what methods, what technique or what research philosophy suits to his or her research problem, or how it can be useful for conducting research. So, in the pragmatic research philosophy, there is no systematic structure of any philosophy. It depends on the way research, on the way the method is useful for a research problem, for the research development. Now, let us take the realist research philosophy, okay, talk about the realist research philosophy, RRP. So, in the realist research philosophy, the researcher and reality, right, researcher R and R1. Let us take the connection of research and how researcher is impacted by this research philosophy. So, in that reality, realist research philosophy, in realist research philosophy, okay, let us say researcher and there is a reality, let us say R1 in this world. Okay. So, researchers tries to investigate into the reality first of all, and then there is a involvement of both. There is objectivity in terms of research, he tries to understand what actually exists, and there is the ways a researcher understand the reality, right. So, in the realist research philosophy, the researcher is more concerned about the reality, the way it happens in the nature, and then he tries to conduct this research. In this research mostly we see that both kind of research methods, quantitative and qualitative, are applied. Now, we will try to understand these two research philosophies discussion by two figures. Yes. So, we will try to analyze two figures which is taken from open access resource, right, by written, this is a paper written by Franz Chukas, and that is very important discussion, right. These two figures are very important, and you can also go through this research resource to understand the idea. So, first of all we will try to discuss about the epistemology, ontology and methodology. So, in the epistemology is the general parameters, right, and so as we discussed in the epistemology, general parameters and assumptions associated with an excellent way to explore the real world nature. In the ontology we see the general assumption created to perceive the real nature of society, and the methodology we see the combination of different techniques used by the scientists to explore different situations. Now, let us try to understand this figure, right. We can expand. Okay. We will be analyzing this table too, right. See, there is a paradigm, ontology, epistemology and research method. So, we see the whole of theoretical and methodological assumptions adopted by scientific community, specific research of which is based on existence theory focused on what exists is based on a particular paradigm, assertion about reality and truth, and it is a theory about the nature of reality that we have discussed already. We have discussed about the epistemology also, and we have discussed about the research methods that they include systematic ways, procedure and tools used for data collection and analysis. So, in the constructivism we can see that is a relativistic reality is socially or experimentally based, local and specific in nature. The knowledge consists of mental constructs that are surrounded by the relative agreements. So, here we see in the constructivism there is a case studies and interview. In the interpretivism we see the researcher and reality are inseparable. Knowledge is based on the abstract description of meanings formed of human experiences. Okay. There we see the case studies, interviews are the methods, phenomenology, ethnography and ethnomethodology, right. So, again in the symbolic interpretivism we see research and reality intertwined, knowledge is created through social interactions and their resulting meanings, and that is grounded theory we apply, right. In the pragmatism, as we can see, the reality is ambiguous, but based on the language, history and culture respect. We see the knowledge derived from experience, the researcher restores subjectively assigned and objective meaning of the other actions. Here we see the methods are interview, case study and surveys. In the positivism philosophy we see the reality is objective and perceived. Acquisition of knowledge is not related to value and moral content. We see the research methods like survey, experiment and the quasi experiment. So, okay. So, we understood something about the examples of this research philosophies and the research methods which are used under these different research philosophies. Now, let us move to the role of logic in research. See, as we know, the logic is the study of arguments, okay. And in that arguments we see there are two types of arguments, we can see valid argument and the invalid argument. And you see without understanding of logic, a researcher cannot understand the any research paper in a right sense, or a researchers cannot write logical in the thesis in the paper in research writing, logic has got a great role, because how you understand what is the right reasoning, what is the wrong reasoning, and what are the good reasons or what are the bad reasons to support any conclusion. How you understand anything without logic, it is not possible. So, logic is something which supports valid conclusion in research, right. And we will be understanding about there are two types of logic, inductive and deductive method we see in the logic. They can be used for theory testing and theory building. So, in theory testing we usually see the deductive method, where we test our test the data based on a established theory, and in theory building we see the application of inductive logic. So, logic provides grounds for valid and invalid reasoning. It develops the right reasoning process in researchers for research writing. Now, we will try to understand what is premise, what is argument, and what is reasoning. We will try to understand the basics of the logic. So, let us take the example that premise 1, which is we can say all humans are mortal. Okay. All humans are mortal. This is the one premise we can say, and second we can say Harry is a human, and then we can establish a conclusion, Harry is mortal. Now, see, in that discussion, premises, these are two premises, we can say all are premises, there are two premises, and we are drawing this conclusion which is called conclusion. So, in an argument is consist of several premises which supports the conclusion, right. If they supports the conclusion with through the right reasoning, and they are valid argument. If they do not support the conclusion, the argument is invalid, right. So, what do you mean by the premise? Okay. A premise is a, or we can say propositions, and sometimes we also call this statement. So, a premise is a statements which is either true or false. Okay. So, the nature of premises are that they can be true or they can be false. They certainly assert something. They are certainly asserting something which is called a premise. So, premises, through the premises we structure the argument. So, argument is a structure which is based on the premises and conclusion. So, in the argument we argue through premises to establish a particular conclusion, and that is called a reasoning. A reasoning is that how we reason through certain premises to arrive at a conclusions. If that reasoning supports conclusively the conclusion, the argument is deductively valid. Like this example, in this argument, this is the argument of deductive valid argument, right, because here the premises conclusively supports the conclusion, and conclusion is certainly true, right. So, conclusion certainly true and the argument is valid. So, argument is consist of premises. In that premise can be true or false. Through premises we draw conclusions. If the premises supports the conclusion, the argument is valid. If they do not support the conclusion, argument is invalid, and that is called the reasoning. Now, we can say there are four types of categorical statements, right. First we say A type, okay, that is all S or P. This is the called universal affirmative, right. These are called the universal affirmative, in which all S are P. Then there are second type of categorical statements which is known as no S or P, which is called universal negative statements. These are categorical statements, right, and this is called universal negative statements where no S or P. The third type of statement which is called I type of statement, which is can case some S or P, this is called particular affirmative statements. Okay. It is about some particular cases where some S are P, and then there is a O type of categorical statements, some S are not P. So, this is called the O type of statements, which is about the some instances which are not the case of P. So, these are 4 types of categorical statements. They are known as A type, E type, I type, O type. A type universal affirmative, E type universal negative, I type particular affirmative, and O type is the particular negative statements. Now, let us try to understand about one more important difference in terms of analytic and synthetic propositions. So, analytic propositions, for example, all mothers have children, right. So, analytic propositions are such statements where the concept is inbuilt in the definition. Such propositions do not add any informations, they are not about the facts of this word, they are simply about the definitional, they are definitional in nature, because we can draw what is already given in the concept, what is already given in the definition. So, like all mothers, being mother is like having a children, right. So, all mothers have children is a analytic propositions. So, there are second type of proposition which is known as synthetic proposition. In that synthetic propositions, like some mothers are strict. Okay. So, some other strict is it is adding some information, right. It is about the fact, it is not something inbuilt in the concept of mother, because all mothers have children. So, mothers having children, it is built in the concept of mother, but mothers are strict. So, in the concept of mother, the concept of strict is not inbuilt. So, it is adding something new information from this world. So, this is called synthetic proposition. So, analytic propositions do not add any new information in our knowledge, while synthetic propositions they add some knowledge in our some informations in our knowledge. Now, there is third type of propositions which we known as tautological propositions. Tautological propositions like a cat is cat. Okay. So, cat is cat, in that statement C, tautology is a repetition, it again does not add anything new, it simply says what is the case, x is x. Okay. So, it is not about the real world knowledge, it is simply about the tautology. While contradictory propositions, when the two propositions they are contradicting each other, right. A cat is not cat, so they contradict in nature, right. So, in tautology is identical, right, while contradiction is contradictory in nature, right. So, again they are not affirming any contingent statement, they are simply contradiction, right. Contingent propositions, they are about the nature, they are about the fact and a case of reality. A cat is on mat, it is contingent, because see in the tautology, in the case of tautology, tautology is true in all possible world, right. Tautology is true in all possible world, okay, while contradiction is false in all possible world, and contingent propositions is a statement which can be true or can be false. If cat is on mat, then it is true, if cat is not on the mat, it is false. So, contingent means the fact which is in a particular space and time, which can be true or which can be false. But you see in the logic of best possible world, the tautology is always true and contradiction is always false, and contingent something about within a space of time, it is about the fact whether it can be true, it can be false. Now, let us try to analyze a very interesting idea in the logic, which is known as square of opposition, right. So, in the square of opposition, again we try to understand the relation among the 4 types of different categorical statements that we have discussed earlier. So, there is a type statement, E type statement and we have the I type statement and we have the O type statement. Okay. So, let us first draw this. Okay. So, in this 4 type of categorical statements, we see there are A type statements, E type statements, I type statements and O type statements. So, A and E they are contrary in nature, right. Both cannot be true, right, but both can be false. Okay. And I and O they are sub contrary in nature. So, both can be true, but both cannot be false. Okay. And A and O and E and I they are contradictory in nature, right. They are contradictions actually. A and O, A that means all S R P, that is A type statement that we have discussed, all no S S P, okay, that is no E type statement, okay. Some S is not P, O type, and some S is P, it is a I type, particular affirmative, particular negative. So, they E and O are their subaltern, okay, in the traditional Aristotelian deductive logic. So, we can see that all S is P A type. So, there is a relation in given relation we can understand A and E they are contrary, and I and O type of statements they are sub contrary, A and O type of statements they are contradictory, and I and E types of statements they are again contradictory, and there is a subaltern relation in the A and I and E and O. Now, we have to understand in the modern square appropriation, which is different from this one. Okay. The modern square appropriation is simply based on this kind of relation, that is simply based on contradiction, and it does not take into account the the other relations, because if there is an empty term, let us say if S is an empty term. So, all S R P we have to have the in the case of empty term we have to understand there is a problem in the traditional square proposition. That is why it does not take into account the contrary, subcontrary and subaltern cases of the traditional of square of propositions. Let us move to the understanding of the truth and falsity in the premises, right. So, we have to understand one point here importantly, that the truth and falsity is the nature of premises. Okay. So, it is not the characteristics of argument. So, all the premises either they can be true or can be false. So, we can say premises are true or false, but argument is always valid or invalid. So, again we can understand that from we can have the let us say a true conclusion. Okay, a conclusion we can have a valid conclusion through false premises also, and we have a valid conclusion through true premises also, right. Both possibility is possible, but truth and falsity we have to understand is the characteristics of the premises. Now, deductive and inductive argument, right. So, we have to understand there are two types of argument. When we say the deductive argument, like we have given the example also that all men are mortal, okay, Harry is a man, Harry is mortal, right, like this example. Okay. In this example, we see that the premises, they conclusively support the conclusion. Okay. When the premises conclusively support the conclusion and the argument is valid, this is called the deductive logic, right. Deductive logic, we have the conclusive support evidence for our conclusion, right. Then this is called deductive argument. So, in the deductive argument, we talk about the certainty. So, all deductive valid argument, they are certainly establishing their conclusions, right. While in the inductive argument, we do not have any conclusive evidence, right. We can say that the premises only probably support the conclusion. So, the probability can be more or less depending on the data it supports. So, in the inductive argument is not about the certainty, okay. It is about the probability, it is about the probability. Okay. And in the deductive logic, we talk about the certainty. So, that is the difference in terms of the nature of the two types of argument. Deductive argument is about the certainty, where the premises conclusively support the conclusion, and inductive argument premises conclusively do not support the argument. They can strongly support, they can probably support the conclusion, right. So, again we have to understand the validity and validity in terms of logic. So, a argument is valid when the premises are supporting, when premises supporting the conclusion, then premises they support conclusively the conclusion, the argument is valid. And when premises do not support the conclusion, when premises support the conclusion, right, then premises support the conclusion, argument is valid, okay. And when the premises they do not support the conclusion, argument is invalid, right, that we have to understand. So, let us try to see that we have the valid argument. So, let us say we have the valid argument, okay, VA through even the false premises, okay, and from the true premises. From both kind of premises we can have the valid argument, right. We can have a true premises and true conclusion, true premises and true conclusion, and we have a false premises, again we can have the true, it is possible, right. But there is one rule that we have to always remember, okay. There is one rule that we have to always remember, that if the premises, both premises, okay, if the, let us say both premises, okay, are true, okay, if the both premises are true, let us say A and B, they are true, then conclusion cannot be false. Conclusion cannot be false in a valid argument. So, conclusion must be true. So, if the both premises are true and conclusion is true, it is a valid argument, right. So, we cannot draw a false conclusion from both true premises in a valid argument, okay. Invalidity we have to understand when the premises both premises are true and conclusion is false, then it is the invalid argument. Now, let us talk about sound argument, right. So, we can have a valid argument, okay. So, valid argument and we have the sound argument, right. So, in valid argument it is not necessary that the given premises are actually true. So, the premises in the valid argument may or may not be about the actual truth or falsity, right. But in the sound argument, if the argument is valid, okay, and the premises are actually true, this is called the sound argument. Now, let us go ahead to understand what is the idea of scientific research, right. So, in the scientific research, we have to understand it is the systematic and planned way of conducting the research, first of all, right. And see, in the scientific research, what we do, we first systematize our research problem, right, and this is the research which is conducted to enhance scientific knowledge through a planned manner in which research data is systematically collected, evaluated and interpreted. So, in the scientific research, first we have a planned way of conducting our research, right. We systematically design our research problem, we test our hypothesis, right, and then we also have a data mechanism, that is we collect our data through a systematized way, and then we evaluate and interpret our data, right, and we also use a particular methodology. So, these are the basics, and these are the characteristics of a scientific research. So, these kind of research actually help in the development and they are very useful for the society, right. See, these days there are many scientific research which are conducted in the area of health care and management, in the area of environmental for the environmental pollution problems, right, for the human well-being. So, you see the scientific research, it provides new techniques, okay, new treatment methods, new diagnostic methods. It also develops different kind of scientific practices in healthcare, in medicine, in social being. You see in the last 2-3 years, right, because the world has faced this COVID crisis, through that you see there are different ways and practices have evolved. People are now more scientific in terms of their lifestyle, using the medicines, and there are many medicines which have been introduced for the human betterment and human health because of the scientific research on that pandemic and that COVID. Now, people are more aware about the about the good life and social well-being because of the scientific research development in that area. Now, let us talk about two important things which is known as verification, falsification. If something is scientific, right, as we see with the rise of Vienna Circle also, that H. A. Ayer, he develops this strong verification principle, and H. A. Ayer says that if X is scientifically existing, okay, then for X we have to have some empirical evidence, conclusive empirical evidence. What do we mean by conclusive empirical evidence? That either we can directly verify the reality through our experiences, it has to be objective, it has to be factual. We can we can simply observe, we can simply experience, and we can verify the reality, right, or we can indirectly trace that reality through the human experience. There are certain historical facts, right, that we cannot perceive, they have happened over a period of time. So, for that we can actually trace those those realities through scientific method or through observational method, or we can have any experiential ground. Okay. So, verification says that anything is scientifically existing only when we have the empirical evidence to validate its reality with having some objective reasons which can be true or false. While Karl Popper, a great philosopher, he gives this theory of falsification, in that he says that any fact can be true, or any theory is only a working theory, a right theory, or you can say a scientific theory, which it can be tested. Okay. It tested means it can have at least one instance where it can be false, right. So, anything which exists have its chances of existence, but it has to have the one case where it can be false. So, any theory is scientific only when it can be verified scientifically verified through experiments, through empirical evidences, okay, or a theory which can be tested and which can be proven wrong in given instances in this reality, right. Now, let us talk about the classification of scientific research. So, we can have a different ways of classifying our scientific research. It may be based on the data collection techniques. So, based on the data collection techniques, we can have observational researches and experimental researches, and observational researches mainly depend on the observations, and where we can have the dependent and dependent in variables. Independent variable does not change, while the dependent variable may change, and we can have also testing the techniques through the experimental also, right. In experimental, we can change any variable and we can check the differences, like any product packaging. If we change the packaging of the product and how it affects, and we change the packaging of the product, but we remain intact all other things like the product and the other things which remain intact, then we can see how it changes the consumer behavior, right, like this. And then we can have the researchers, scientific researchers based on the causality relationship. They are like descriptive and analyticals, and then we can have the based on relationships with time. They are known as retrospective, prospective and cross sectional researches, and then we can have the based on the according to medium by which they are they are conducted, okay. So, they are the type of clinical researches, laboratory based researches, social descriptive researches. Again we can have the different kind of classifications, okay, like descriptive research, in which we can have the case studies, case series and surveillance type of studies, and analytical research we can have the observational studies, in which we can have a cohort type of case studies, case control studies, cross sectional research studies, and then we can have the interventional research, where we can have use the quasi experimental researches and the clinical researches. They are the different type of the scientific researches which are conducted in the scientific research, and mostly they are conducted in the clinical researches and medical sciences. So, these are some references. So, today in this lecture we try to understand, analyze the role of philosophy and the role of logic, and we try to understand the idea of scientific research in the way it helps to a researcher in order to develop the research in a logical manner, in a philosophical manner, and what can contribute at best to society and the social well-being. Okay. So, these are some references which I have used to prepare this lecture. They can be useful for you also. Thank you.